All right, we are back. What is going on, Colts Nation? And welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice, guys. It is almost training camp time. I can't believe we are finally here. We get the answer to some questions. And of course, we had to bring on good friend of the show from the fan, Kevin Bowen himself. Kevin, how you been, my friend? Long time no see.
Hey, Cody. Yeah, it has been a while, man. How's everything in your world?
It's going well, man. Like we were talking off air, summer's just a little wild right now. And I know your world's about to get a whole lot crazier once the Colts get back to camp. And obviously, Pacers back in October. So a lot going on in the sports world, which is exciting.
Yeah, definitely. I know I always kind of get a little antsy post July 4th of here we are. So, yeah, just a couple weeks away before we start to, inch closer to another season.
Yeah, it's kind of wild that we're already here. But Kevin, there's a lot to talk about here with this Colts training camp, and obviously a lot of question marks with, some question marks about the future of a lot of people, right? And I'm kind of curious for you because I know you do this annual burning questions sort of article. There's a lot of good stuff in there, so guys, be sure to go check that out. But Kevin, to you, what is kind of like the biggest question overarching for this team heading into kind of an uncertain season? For a lot of people, what's kind of the biggest thing coming into this training camp storyline wise that you're looking at this year?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton of different directions I think you go with it. Obviously, you kind of hinted at the organizational uncertainty with Chris Ballard in a contract year. I think anytime a head coach is heading into year four and there's nothing in the playoffs on the resume, you're naturally going to have, questions there about, that person's future. Obviously, kind of it's Carly Gordon's first full season, if you will, running the show. So, that is another aspect to it. And then, of course, personnel wise, you can go up and down the roster. You have let go of some pillar players here over the last offseason, the last few months. That's a little unusual for the Chris Ballard tenure. Obviously, Daniel Jones' situation. How do you view that? Guys like Jonathan Taylor and DeForest Buckner and Quentin Nelson, some of these other pillar Colts and, variety of levels from the injury situation to Buckner and a little bit more contract probably with Taylor and Nelson. Is this going to continue to be the same core or, are we nearing something to where you do strip it down, or was the first 2 months of the season, more of what this regime is at this point in the era? And are you there with Jacksonville and Houston, deeper into the year coming up this fall? So, yeah, I think a ton of questions in a way. It's a little bit of running back, but I don't think that's a great application either to the offseason they just had. So, yeah, plenty of questions to be answered here coming up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, within that, there's obviously going to be some players. I mean, we saw, like you said, it's not really run it back because there's going to be a lot of new starters, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I'm curious for you, like, what are the biggest position battles that you're watching here in camp with some of these new positions that are kind of wide open? Because I know there's a ton of them here, probably the most Chris Ballard's had in quite some time. So, what would you say are some of the biggest battles you're watching here in camp?
Yeah, offensively, definitely just kind of the whiteout depth chart. Do they go out and sign a veteran free agent? Do they trust Ashton Doolin in a more expanded role? What is Alec Pierce's health situation? When you look at losing Michael Pittman Jr., Cody, there are a couple of those you can point to on the roster where they have, given a nice draft pick to. CJ Allen for Zaire Franklin, if you will. Justin Wally for Kenny Moore. Maybe AJ Halsey for Nick Cross. That's not there at wideout. Same with free agency. And so, again, how does that play out? At right tackle, I think it's pretty one for one. Jalen Travis being the in-house guy for Braden Smith. But again, Braden was, a huge, huge consistent mainstay for you for nearly a decade at right tackle. Defensively, I can point to about five of them. Quiddy Pay gone. Is it really Arden Key versus Jalen Tuimalo out for that spot? It looked like more Key to me back in the back in the spring. Will that be the case when the full pads come on? Again, linebacker, I assume it'll be Allen as that lead guy. Who's next to him? Is it Akeem Davis Gaither, given the Lou Anarumo familiarity? Is it, Bryce Betcher? Does he push it all as a fourth round pick out of Oregon? And then, again, secondary wise, is it those two guys that, you did draft high in the Anarumo era and Wally and then Halsey. So that's where, again, run it back. I get there wasn't maybe a ton of free agent splashes outside of the building, but you're replacing seven starters. if we added up all their career starts with the Colts, Cody, I mean, you're talking probably over 500, maybe 600 career starts. So that's a lot to replace, especially in a year where you didn't change coordinators, schemes, head coach, obviously GM, those sorts of things.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there's a ton of things I feel like you could point to there for some things that are going to be interesting. But there are a couple players that I think are kind of unknowns at this point, right? There's guys that I feel like you could either say, hey, they could legitimately start for you, or they could kind of be back into the roster guys. I'm curious if there's any guys that you look at specifically, Kevin, and you say, and it's kind of similar to the question I asked you, but like any specific players, you're like they need to have strong camps, like in order to justify maybe where they were drafted or what the Colts gave them in free agency or what they gave up to acquire them, like all those things. Are there any guys that stand out to you that you're like, they have to have big years because if not, they may not really be a part of this team's future plans in years to come?
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I every year, and I'll do it here in the coming days or so. I do like a most approve article, and again, how you kind of define that, I think, is a variety of ways. To me, you can define it by how much money you're paying that player, what you gave up to get that player, maybe some health reasons in that player's career. Obviously, you start with Daniel Jones. I mean, I think that's obvious. There's obviously a ton to prove at quarterback every year, particularly one that has been injured and has struggled with consistency in his career. I would apply Sauce Gardner to that, more for the investment reasons and what you traded to get him. Leatu Latu, I think, would fall on that list. Mooney Ward, probably more for health reasons than anything else. Alec Pierce, due to the new contract. And then again, you can kind of go a little bit down the list of like a Jalen Tuimoloau is like, yeah, he's a second round pick and he has yet to really prove himself in the NFL. So, it's that Jalen Travis, again, fourth round pick. I don't want to act like it was a huge investment, but you're handing him, really valuable starting right tackle keys. Josh Downs is in a contract year. You could say DeForest Buckner just more for health. I mean, he's had a great NFL career, but still. And then obviously he's still on the roster as of us chatting about this. Anthony Richardson, being in a contract year, I guess would technically still fall into that category. So again, I always enjoyed that debate, Cody, because I feel like there's so many ways you can go with it. Just how you define prove. I used to just label it, the Colts had the most pressure on them. And again, pressure, I think, can mean a lot of different things for a lot of different players. Contractual pressure, health pressure, internal pressure from what that team needs out of you, all of those things.
Yeah. Is there anybody that you look at right now on this roster and you say, hey, there may be a guy that a lot of people aren't really talking about a whole lot right now, but based off of what we've seen in the past, whether they didn't play because of injury last year, like I know with some of those rookies, or maybe they're guys that are flying under the radar. Anybody that you would point to that you said, hey, maybe watch out for this guy a little bit. Like, doesn't mean he's going to come in and be an all pro, but he might contribute a little bit more and make some more waves than a lot of people are thinking initially.
It's a good question. Arden Key is a name that kind of jumps out, and I get that he wasn't on the team last year, but when they signed Arden Key back in the spring, I kind of looked at the move. It was an early in free agency signing. I said, that needs to be a move at defensive end, not the move at
Right.
defensive end. Well, it ended up being the move.
Mhm.
So that's good for Arden Key. I mean, he's got a great opportunity awaiting for him. So I would put him there. Hunter Wohler at safety. I don't think we fully realized how much that staff believed in Hunter Wohler playing a massive role last season before the foot injury. So, again, they drafted Halsey, but still, whether it's sub packages, whether it's, maybe taking some reps from Halsey, how does that look exactly at strong safety? Offensively, I mean, Doolin's kind of the obvious one. I mean, I am kind of curious as what happens behind Jonathan Taylor.
Mm.
Taylor had such pristine health last season that we just kind of take that for granted. And it's like, well, normal running back health would say he's probably going to miss some time. So is it DJ Giddens? Is it Seth McGowan? Do they go out and find another running back? That would probably be another position group, kind of couple young guys that I would point to.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Now, kind of looking at, there's obviously, like we said, a ton of questions with this team, a lot of new roster changes and new guys starting and stuff. But Kevin, with all the questions being said, like, to you, in your mind, that would make you feel like this could be a successful season for Indianapolis? And obviously, we saw the shift from the beginning of last year to the end of last year. But in your mind, what are some things that you need to see in a positive light to make you feel confident that this season is more of the start of the year as opposed to the last part of the year where the collapse obviously happened? Like, what do you need to see? What are those questions that you need answered in a good way in order to confidently say that, or at least a little more confident than we are right now where we sit, here a couple weeks pre-camp?
Well, I think realistically, it's just hard to expect the offense to exactly replicate what they did the first 2 months. I mean, that's just, it's really unseen in a lot of ways. Pretty remarkable, frankly. But again, expecting to duplicate that, given if you really want to get in the weeds, the schedule is probably a little bit more beneficial for you than what you thought. Obviously, Jones's health, is the obvious one. But I'll keep on going back to Latu, and I just don't think there's a player on the Colts roster more important to this season than him, outside of Daniel Jones. Just him taking that third year jump, because when you think of that pairing of rushing and covering, you can be great elite cover corners, and after 5 seconds, you're naturally going to have a breakdown. That's just the nature to it. But and again, you can throw away from high level corners. It's not ideal for an offense, but you can do that. Whereas if you have a really effective pass rusher, I think that guy demands a little bit more of a game plan. Obviously, he's closer to the line of scrimmage, so it's easier to impact, from an immediacy standpoint. Um, and then, when you factor into Forrest Buckner's situation, Cody, it just to me, Latu is just so massive for this season. So, I would point to that, and then, again, can you try to avoid the natural rookie growing pains that you have, because you are going to throw a lot on those young guys' plate. I've mentioned it before this offseason. There's a good chance they have 3 starters defensively that have never played a snap in the NFL. And really, Hunter Wooler, you could throw in there as like a 12 starter, and he would fall into that boat. So, 4 pseudo starters that have never played a snap in the NFL, and they're all right in the middle, of your defense. When you think about, Al, and I'm not even including Bryce Betcher. Maybe I mean you could have another there, but Allen and Halsey and Justin Wally and then Wooler as well. It's quite remarkable, really. Um, what they could be doing here. So that's where I think just those rookie growing pains. Like, I've brought up this analogy before on our show of, like, when you look back on that 2022 draft, it ended up being a great draft. Alec Pierce, Bernard Ryman, Nick Cross, but you wouldn't have said that about any of them after year one. And like, we can't be in January, Cody, having this conversation, and we say, well, maybe CJ Allen will show more in year two, and then also say that about AJ Halsey, and then also say that about, I guess, call Justin Wally a rookie just for the sake of the argument. Um, that would be, and again, it's a lot to expect, but, and these guys have shown a lot in college, where I think is a little different than maybe the previous group that I mentioned. Cross was young, Ryman was still young football wise, playing at the MAC level. Pierce wasn't really ascending as that full-time wideout for Cincinnati until late in his tenure there. Whereas, Allen's been a multi-year SEC starter. Halsey's produced everywhere. Wally was a 4-year starter in the Big Ten. So that's a little bit different.
Yeah, for sure. I kind of want to stay with that real quick, Kevin. And this is kind of the final thing before we wrap this thing up here. You mentioned some of these rookies, some of these young guys that are going to be coming in and fulfilling roles. We obviously know CJ Allen, AJ Halsey, and potentially Bryce Betcher. But is there any other rookies that you think could contribute to this roster? Maybe not as starters, but guys that could be key contributors to this team, off the bench whenever they're called upon.
Yeah, but you got to go to Jalen Farmer, the 4th-round pick out of Kentucky. I still think their starting offensive line is set. I think Matt Gonzalez is the guy at right guard, but a 6 offensive lineman, is a pseudo starter as well. So, he would be the next guy. I know position flexibility is maybe still a bit of a question, but that's who I would probably go with. Just based off of, well, the 7th-round guys, Seth McGowan and Deion Burks, they both got drafted into favorable depth chart situations. So, again, that's pretty advantageous for them. At edge rusher, there's not a ton, I think, sitting there for George Gumbs Jr. and or Caden Curry, but still, you're probably only one injury away from it being a little open. And I do think you're kind of curious just how that depth chart plays out, opposite Latu there. So, um, but definitely those seventh round, if Seth McGowan is your backup running back, if he wins that job, I mean, you're one Jonathan Taylor injury away from 18 carries in a game. So, but again, if there's any position on the roster, I think that can kind of handle something like that. To me, it is a little bit of running back.
Gotcha. Well, Kevin, I do appreciate your time, and we'll have to see how obviously camp goes, some of these battles play out, and things like that. But man, anything that you've been working on, or things that people can check out over on the Fan?
Yeah, so I co-host our fan morning show here in Indianapolis on 107.5 The Fan. It's every Monday through Friday, 7 to 10 a.m. And then I always do a written series this time of year. It's going to post here just before camp of 53 Colts questions to watch in training camp. Obviously, the 53 number based off of roster cuts. So it's always a long exercise. I'm about halfway through it as we speak right now. So that'll have a lot of my attention here over the next few days.
I mean, it's like your novel you're writing, right? How long have you been working on that thing now?
Yeah, I think I look back. I think it's like the fifth or sixth year that I've done it. So yeah, I kind of forgot about it till like mid-June, and usually it's something I like to start on almost back in the earlier in the spring. But we're
Sure.
making a good dent in it right now, and I'll be very grateful when it's all said and done.
Awesome. Well, appreciate your time, Kevin. Everybody be sure to go check out all his work over there. But guys, that'll do it for this one. Let us know your thoughts on training camp, anything that you're expecting, you're looking for, all that good stuff. But again, that'll do it for this one. Thanks so much, guys. And as always, go Colts.